Welcome to episode 85 of Reclaiming the Faith. I'm your host, Phil Baker. This is a special episode for me because in this episode and the next two, I get to interview my dad, Olen Baker, who is a licensed professional counselor, about the topic of grief. If you want to find out more about my dad, Olen Baker, I really want to encourage you to check out first his podcast that he's begun to put out called Attitudes Answers, and also his blog, attitudesanswers.blogspot.com. Please go check that out. You can find out more about him and his ministry there. Also, you'll hear on his podcast a voiceover by Ray Schillens of Radio Lounge USA, which you can find at radioloungeusa.com. Just incredible guys over there that do great work for voiceovers and podcasts and commercials. They record albums, just incredible work that these guys at Radio Lounge do. So please go check them out. All right, like I said, this episode is part one of a three-part interview with my dad, Olen Baker, on grief. And in this episode, he breaks down different types of grief. So please check this out. I know it's going to be a blessing to you. And if it is, please consider leaving a rating and review on my Apple Podcast channel, Reclaiming the Faith. And please go check out my dad's podcast as well, Attitudes Answers, and leave him a good rating and review as well there. Well, you can find all of my resources at philsbaker.com. So please go over there and check out those resources. All right. Well, without any further ado, let's go ahead and get episode 85 rolling. All right. Well, Olen Baker, or better for me, Dad. It's really good to have you on Reclaiming the Faith. Thank you so much for carving some time out of your schedule to do this.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to get to do this with my son, Philip.
Yeah, I definitely miss our Thursday lunches.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, will you tell the people a little bit about how you became a Christian?
Well, when I was a youngster, 8 or 9 years old, I can remember this really vivid and plain. I was at this little country church where we attended church. They were having a revival meeting, and I was about 8 years old, I guess, and there were lots of people that were responding to the revival meeting. And there's 30, 40 people in this little tiny church, in this little tiny farming community. And I felt the Spirit of the Lord talking to me and urging me to become a follower of Christ. And that was really hard, and I'm sitting there evaluating this, and I'm thinking, I want to do that.
Yeah.
But I'm too scared to walk down the aisle right now. So I promise I'll do it later when I'm not so scared to go walking down this little tiny aisle of, 15, 20 feet.
Yeah.
So when I was a little older, we had moved from this little farming community to a small town, and my dad was working at a dealership in this little town, and so he took me every Sunday morning to the Baptist church.
Okay.
I think I was the only one that went to church, actually, during those times, but he'd always drop me off. And then again, when I was about 12, I guess, well, they're having a revival meeting, as they called them, in those days at our church, and it was outside because the church didn't have air conditioning. So they had lights and chairs set out in the parking lot.
Right.
And there was a good group of people coming, but whatever the pastor was talking about, or the visiting preacher, brought back to memory, my promise that when I was a little older and I wasn't so scared to walk down the aisle, I would do it.
Yeah.
So me and my little friend, Paul Moore, were sitting there at the church. Again, I'm the only one from my family that's there. There was something about me that in all of my days of going to church and just basically sitting with my friend or somebody else that made me listen to what the pastor was saying.
Yeah.
Instead of coloring or reading or, cutting up with the friends or whatever in the preaching service, because I was there by myself, basically.
Yeah.
So I decided that I would go down and tell the preacher that I was making a decision to be a Christian. And my little friend went with me, of course, because I went, he went.
Yeah.
It's like I'm influencing him to go down and make a profession of faith, as they call it. So that was the moment that I think I became a Christian when I was 8.
Yeah.
It just took me longer to walk down the aisle because I firmly believed that Jesus was the Son of God, that he was forgive me for all of my sins, that I could become a permanent follower of Christ. And that was my decision.
And how old were you when you eventually walked the aisle?
12.
12.
Right.
All right, middle school.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right. We lived we had moved from this little town of about 200 to a town of where there was about 1,500.
Yeah.
Big place.
Yeah. Well, you went from tiny to little to bigger, and then after high school, you got into the Air Force.
That's right.
Yeah, so that's a whole new ball game too for a country boy.
That's right. That I was not prepared or ready to be disciplined enough to go to college.
Yeah.
And so I decided that I would just get volunteer and do a 4-year tour of duty in the Air Force rather than waiting around to get drafted.
Yeah.
Vietnam was just picking up a bit, and it was going to get worse.
Yeah.
So my cousins got drafted.
Yeah.
And for a year or 2 years, whatever the draft was, and it was okay for me to, I might have even decided to make that a career instead of just going and doing my military duty. I thought I can stay in the Air Force for 30 years and I'll still be in my 40s.
Yeah.
Rather than just doing my 4-year.
Yeah.
I like the idea of having a career.
Yeah. Well, God had his plans for you.
He did.
And his plans were a little bit different. And so how did you, while you're in the military, how did you come to decide that you wanted to be a Christian counselor?
Well, when you're assigned to a certain duty,
Yeah.
in a certain career field. It's assigned to you. You don't get to choose. They
Right.
choose.
Yeah.
So I was in what they called an engineering squadron. And I met this young man who had been in combat. He had been wounded severely, so much so that he spent 6 months in a hospital recovering from
Wow.
his wounds. And he had gone to, when he got out of the military, he had gone to the University of Florida down in Gainesville, Florida. And he was taking all these psychology courses as a form of therapy, I think.
Yeah.
But that doesn't usually work too good. But he was telling me about, the counseling that he did get in college, because most colleges have a counseling center, where you can go and
right.
talk about issues. And so just talking with him about his experience and the counseling that he got at college made me think, I can do that.
Right.
I can do that. That's what I want to do. So I got out of the Air Force, but in the meantime, in my 2 years remaining, I attended a community college that was 10 minutes away from the air base. So I could, I asked for a job where I could work in the afternoon and evening. It's like the second shift in something. So my sergeants assigned me to the water plant.
Yeah.
And I learned how to operate that water plant. That meant getting water from 7 wells to the water treatment plant and up to the tower. And I did that for the remaining time I had in the Air Force. But in the morning, I would go to attend classes at the junior college that was across the way from the base. So I finished up my freshman year while I was in the Air Force, but I did my full-time job doing that too. But God just worked out things. But just meeting people, meeting this young man that had studied psychology and got counseling, that he was right there. He was the barracks chief.
Yeah.
We called him the dorm mother, know, because he could take humor.
Yeah.
Having 60 guys, in the barracks, you have to be able to take a little humor and have some fun with it, but very strict on duties and Air Force regulations.
Yeah. Well, after your 4 years in the Air Force, you went to North Texas, right?
That's right.
And then to seminary as well.
That's right.
Yeah.
When I was in the Air Force, I went over to talk with the chaplain, who was a Baptist minister, but he was the chaplain for everybody.
Yeah.
And he was a counselor himself. He had to do counseling. So I went to talk to him about what I wanted to do, and he said to me, if that's what you want to do, prepare yourself for the ministry, to study and show yourself worthy of the calling that God has placed in your life. And that means that you should go to college, you should get a college degree. It meant that you should go to seminary and get a seminary degree.
Yeah.
And then that you should do your clinical training somewhere. So that's what I did. So I graduated from the University of North Texas. I graduated from Southwestern Baptist
Theological.
seminary.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I came to Houston.
Yeah.
I was going to be here for a couple of years. And
Yeah.
so I spent 2 years at the Institute of Religion and Human Development out at the medical center.
Okay.
And I got to work in hospitals as a chaplain intern.
Yeah, and you worked at Ben Taub for a little bit, right?
Well, for a couple of years.
Yeah, and I'm sure you saw a lot of crazy stuff there.
Well,
You get baptized by fire at Ben Taub.
Well, it's exactly true. Everything comes through the emergency room there.
Yeah.
And you had to do whatever you needed to do, whatever you were assigned to do.
Yeah, and kind of speaking of trauma, as you're seeing people with encountering so many different types of trauma there, and in your 40 plus years of counseling, just a common theme that people will come to you with is they have some type of grief. So encountering people with very different types of trauma that led to different types of grief, whether it be a death in the family or just a horrible accident, it could be some kind of relationship trauma. It leads to different types of grief. So what are some different types of grief?
Well, generally speaking, there's grief that you might think of as anticipatory grief. That's where if someone is sick, they have to go to the hospital or they're going away. It's like when I left to go to the Air Force. I think it affected my dad more than it did my mother because his idea was that when you're in the military, you're shooting a gun, you're being shot at.
Yeah.
There's other kinds of ways that you'll get killed.
Yeah.
Or wounded severely.
Right.
Kind of like the friend that I met, in Florida. So he was grieving so much that he couldn't talk to me.
That's cool. I've never heard that term, anticipatory grief, but it's obvious once you hear it. Like, it happens all the time.
That's right. If something is changing in your family, like someone is late coming home.
Yeah.
And that's not like them because they all show up. You begin to imagine what could have happened to them.
Yeah.
And so you anticipate. Well, some people are just given to thinking the worst possible case.
Yeah.
And they begin to grieve. And then the person comes home and said, well, had a little fender bender.
Yeah.
Or somebody had a fender bender and I was just unable to get past it. And so a couple of hours later, I was able to get past all of the chaos or commotion or whatever. Or if someone is changing in the family like they're changing, and you begin to imagine what could be causing this person to be different.
Yeah.
They're not as affectionate. They're not as verbal, or they're not as talking. They seem distant. What's going on?
Yeah.
And you begin to anticipate what might be happening.
And that's normal.
That's right.
Yeah.
It is normal, but it may cause you to be sad.
Yeah.
It may cause you to be angry. And it just may be a time in life where things physically change.
Yeah.
And so you're beginning to change and be different and maybe to be sad or whatever about something that hadn't happened yet.
Yeah.
But you're imagining it to be something. So that's anticipatory grief.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and then there's normal grief, just normal grief that everybody is supposed to experience. Like you get older and you lose some of your athletic ability.
Yeah.
And that causes you to be sad because you can't get out and do the thing. You can't play as hard. You can't run as fast. You can't walk as far. You lose something.
Metabolism slows down, and you don't look the way you used to.
You gain too much weight, and that causes people to be sad.
Yeah.
But your aging parents die. Both of my parents have passed away.
Yeah.
So it's normal to feel sad about that and to go through the stages of grief. People get divorced. Their children leave home and go to college. All of those things cause normal grief. You lose your job.
Yeah.
In this COVID-19 time that we're going through right now, people's they can't go to work.
Yeah.
Maybe they've been laid off, or their job came to an end. Or the company merged or whatever, and you lose your job.
Right.
That causes grief and sadness, causes people to be fearful of what's going to happen to us. And so you go through these normal stages of grief. And then there's a type of grief called cumulative grief.
Okay.
And someone was telling me that he lost his job because of the company merging, and that caused a crisis within the family. So he and his wife got divorced because of all of the stress and the grief that was going there. And so they lost their house because they couldn't make the payments on it. Just
one thing after another. It's kind of like Job.
Yes.
His house, his fields, his animals, his kids, and then he has all these physical ailments, one thing after another.
That's cumulative.
Yeah.
That means that grief is layered in, one layer after the other.
Yeah.
So that's another type of grief. And then there's a type of grief that's called complicated grief, because the process of grieving through a loss causes other things to happen. Like the grieving process may cause you to begin to worry excessively, even to the point of causing ulcers. Because of the gastric acid that's building up in your stomach, and you can't process it, so it eats away at the lining of your stomach. So, or you could get so depressed that you cannot function well.
Yeah.
You want to stay in bed all the time, and you just can't, you don't have the energy or the effort or the reason to do the normal things that you normally do. So that can be complicated. It can be complex, and because there's too many things to work out.
Yeah.
And then there's another thing called delayed grief, where people put it off.
Yeah.
Now, most people do that to some degree because it's inappropriate to be grieving from their perspective. It's like when my dad died, and I went up to just take care of things. Well, he had not prepared for his death.
Yeah.
He had no arrangements, nothing. So I had to go to the funeral home and purchase a casket for him.
Yeah.
Because they won't bury you unless you have a casket.
Yeah.
And deciding how much to spend on that casket, that would be what he agreed with. He was a very simple guy, needed simple stuff, didn't need anything fancy. So, we had to decide how much to spend on this.
Yeah.
And then where is he going to be buried?
Yeah.
And and he wanted to be buried way out in the country, kind of close to where when I was a little boy growing up. And so making arrangements for them to dig the grave, get the graveyard, the cemetery prepared. So I'm doing all of these things, and then all these people coming to the house,
There's so much to do. You have to take care of stuff. I mean, it's making me think of, you were talking about soldiers, like your dad's worries about you being in war, right? Well, if you are in war and your best friend gets shot, you don't have time to stop and grieve. You have a job to do. Right.
And that's why, we hear so much about post-traumatic stress syndrome. That's where you're grieving or you're going through a situation months later or whatever. When I got home, I didn't cry at my dad's. And in addition to that, the pastor wanted me to get up and talk and tell stories about him.
Right.
And so I have to be together enough to do that.
Yeah.
And so when getting home, a few days later and going back to work and doing all my stuff, all of a sudden I began to feel it.
Yeah.
It began to hit me when I'm calm, when I'm not stressed out because of all of these tasks that had to be done. The grief started coming.
Yeah.
But I was able to know what it was and to give myself permission to go ahead and be sad, to cry, to have moments when I'm just kind of really having deep sorrow about my dad going, never going to talk to him again, ever.
Yeah.
Never going to see him again. Never going to go up there and he has jobs for me to do because I could do jobs for him.
Yeah.
That he didn't want to do.
Yeah.
He had money to get anything he wanted, but he liked for me to fix it.
Yeah, right. The Aubrey engineering.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I could do it. I just had that ability to work on stuff, to fix, like put a fuel pump on his car one time.
Yeah.
Or fixed the cook stove, his electric range, where three of the elements had burned out. And so he liked for me to fix it.
Yeah.
And, well, I need for you to do this or whatever. But I enjoyed doing that because I liked working on stuff and fixing stuff. That got me in trouble as a little boy because I could start his cars up and drive them.
Yeah.
Without his permission.
Right.
He never once ever spanked me for something like that.
Yeah.
Because I could just do stuff, and I think it made him,
He's kind of proud of you.
I could do it.
Yeah.
On one hand, but that could be dangerous, like starting the tractor up when I'm just a little tot.
Yeah.
That means I'm 6 or 7 years old, and I can start his tractor up, and for my sister and I to take a ride down.
Yeah.
When he would be gone out someplace. So I missed doing all of that stuff, and all of that stuff would hit me later. And that's called delayed grief again. And there's another type of grief that's called inhibited grief, where you will not allow yourself to do something because it might make somebody else uncomfortable.
Those are kind of similar, like cousins.
It is.
Yeah.
They kind of go together. So society might not think it's good for you to grieve in public.
Yeah.
or show your anger, or show your sadness, or question God. So these restrictions that sometimes society places on you.
You can see that in like maybe some different roles of authority or leadership. People feeling like they have to project a certain image of having it together.
Right.
And I mean, that could be like ministers or parents,
Absolutely.
or, just some kind of authoritative role.
Or, even serving as a counselor. I could keep myself together and still do my job.
Right.
Rather than identifying with the client and experiencing my own stuff.
Yeah.
I knew what would be going on if that was even had any of the potential for making me feel what they're feeling.
Yeah, and it's natural for that to happen. Like you're talking about your dad's death, and I'm thinking about myself and us, and me not wanting to go through that.
Right.
Because that's just the power of story. But I definitely get like you feeling like not just you have a job to do, but you're trying to help the other person by stuffing what's going on inside you.
Right, I have to be, you have to be together to help people, but there's other places where you can go to show your grief. But sometimes you just have to keep it to yourself.
Yeah.
It's part of it. There's another type of grief that's called disenfranchised grief. And that is where it's kind of similar to what this inhibited grief, but it's like if you lose your pet. And everybody says, it's only a dog or a cat or a mouse or whatever your
a boa constrictor,
is, that you have identified. And pets do become like members of the family.
Right.
And you love them to death. And like in our family, we had a little dog named Shandy. And he was an outside dog.
Yeah.
He just loved to be outside. And he didn't have to be locked up because he wasn't going anywhere.
Yeah.
He just loved being outside. And every day when I would come in from work, this little dog, this little Sheltie, little tiny...
like a miniature collie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're called miniature Shetland sheepdogs,
Yeah.
you know. He would be there to meet me. I'd open the door and he'd hop up in the car.
Yeah.
And then he would be in my lap for a minute. I'd pet him, talk to him, and then he would hop over in the passenger seat, saying, "Okay, let's go for a ride." Yeah. Well, true to form, when he was, 14 or 15, he began to get sick.
Yeah,
kind of like elderly human beings when they get to a certain age, things quit working, know, and so. Shandy was part of the family. He was my wife's dog initially. Yeah. But then he became my dog.
Yeah.
Because I would talk to him and pet him and play with him and all kinds of stuff, So disenfranchised grief is where that's just a dog. You can't grieve about that. In a political sense, it's where somebody's vote that is not going to be allowed to count. We heard a lot about that during one of the elections a few years ago.
Sure.
Where people's vote weren't allowed to count or whatever. And in grief, It's where you're not allowed to grieve because it's not acceptable.
Society thinks this is too minor for you to waste your time grieving on it.
That's right. But we're so individualistic in grieving that how we identify, is different from people. And there are some people that where it's called absent grief, where people, I'm not grieving. I don't feel anything. I don't need to grieve. I refuse to grieve. I'm not going to do it. One of my friends one time went through divorce. She says, I'm not going to grieve about that, stupid. And she used some words that I can't say, but,
right.
I'm not going to grieve over that. I'm going to have a new life. I am going to have fun for a chance in my life, and good riddance.
Yeah.
See, so I'm pleased, I'm relieved, I'm glad this guy is gone.
Yeah, trying to reframe it as a positive rather than a loss.
But they're refusing to, they're discounting the power of attachment. And what happens to people when an attachment is broken. Now, her grief may have started way early in their marriage. But it just got so complex and complicated and too much emotions and stuff that I will not allow myself to grieve over that person. But, 2 marriages later, kind of hit her.
Yeah.
It took about 6 or 7 or 8 years. But then the grief and loss of her first husband began to come back. And that's kind of interesting how that does that. And that's just called absent grief. And then there's one more, and it's called exaggerated grief.
Okay.
Where, everything is more intense. It's maxed out. It's so exaggerated that it's hard for the person to make any kind of progress on it. Like, I will never have another relationship, even though I'm maybe young and capable of having other relationships. I will never, that was my one love for life. Like people get killed in car accidents. That happened one time at Ben Taub, where a young woman who was the mother of 2 little boys, they all were in the car, and she is the only fatality of that horrific wreck that happened on the Gulf Freeway. And this mother was so overtaken that is their only child. And all she wanted to do was just be angry and hostile and mean to, I got to be part of that.
Yeah.
To the point where, and her husband, the father, he's in such a state of shock that he can't move and he can't talk. He's just there. And the mother is attacking everybody. So I wound up having to restrain her because she was going to hurt me or her husband or herself. And so I had to restrain her because her grief was so exaggerated.
Yeah.
But that happened during a state of shock.
Yeah. You know, it seems like all of these different types of grief are methods of the way God has made us to protect ourselves. It's like the autonomic response of like fight or flight. We're just trying to keep ourselves safe and protect ourselves, protect others. And that last one made me think it's almost like by being so angry, I don't have to attack. I'll keep myself from attaching to people so I can't get hurt.
Fire of the old days, like a child before hope fades, disappointment sets in. Wake me to your wonder and shake me from this slumber and make me burn with passion again.